All right, well, welcome back to the Alaska Sea Life Center for another live virtual visit. My name is Alex, and if you haven't joined us before, this is entirely new to you. But if you joined us last week, this is going to look really, really familiar, and that is because last week we had some audio issues. And so this week we just decided we were going to show you the same area again. This time we wanted to make sure that you could hear us nice and clear, so please don't hesitate to comments in the chat, or you can text us with that text number that we had at the beginning there. But the chat is open for comments. And we'd love to know where people are watching from. So go ahead and drop that down in the chat. While I would like to thank our sponsors for this. So these virtual visits this year are able to be made live with thanks to the Royal Caribbean Group and the Alaska Travel Industry Association Foundation. So with those two groups there, we have been able to make these virtual visits live. But of course, we want to thank our viewers from last year's virtual visits that showed that this was something people wanted to see. So today we're going to be taking a look at the new Rocky Coast Discovery Pools here at the Alaska Sea Life Center. And those are our touch tanks. So we're going to be kind of going through, taking a look at the critters here. And the water is pretty chilly, but I'll be putting my hands in. Talking about chilly, we will show our sunrise from this morning. This is kind of becoming a little tradition here. This is the sunrise just from this morning out on Resurrection Bay there. You can see pretty cloudy today. It's not too cold yet. We do have Rebecca running the computer today, watching out for some questions as well. So I think Rebecca would probably say it's getting a little too cold, but it's not chilly yet. We don't have snow on the ground here at the Sea Life Center, but our sunrises are getting later and later and later. So last year, we did talk a little bit about our touch tanks. And we can actually show a time-lapse of the construction of these new touch tanks. And that will show kind of what the old ones looked like briefly, just right there at the very beginning. One of the things they had to do was we actually had to rip out all this old carpet. As strange as it is, it doesn't seem like a good idea now, but it might have when we opened in 1998. We had carpeting right next to the old touch tanks, so those got pretty wet sometimes. They actually came in, we had some folks come in, put down real nice like vinyl flooring, so that's a lot easier to clean. And the new touch tank kind of curves around the corner. You can see they had to lay out these little templates, plan it out. We had to punch some new holes for plumbing. And there's actually another secondary little touch tank off to the left-hand side that you'll see coming towards the end. And we're still not done. This is just the construction of the main tanks. We've actually got some smaller tanks coming in as well. But you can see right at the end of this clip here, kind of like our first opening day. Well, this is the old touch tank to give you a comparison. And then this is the new touch tank. So it's really given a lot more floor space, but it has a lot more flow to it as well. So today, to take a look at the touch tank, we're actually going to put you in a couple smaller cameras, and we're going to move on over to one of our cameras all the way down on that end and get started. All right, so my computer's all the way back there, but we're going to start from this side, and we're going to work our way around. Now, as you saw in that video, there are several different tanks. So this is kind of the first touch tank, although we've got Laura running the camera, and if they could pan on over to the side here, you can see that the touch tank is built right up against, this is kind of like right below low tide. We've got some little juvenile rockfish in there, little rockfish. They're super cute. We've got a little bit of seagrass there. There's some crab in there. We've actually got abalone, too. I don't know if we do have. And so straight from the critters here, the Discovery Pool, and these are our on. And so you can see, I'll come on in, but they're pretty shy. I actually came on over to check. Sometimes they actually people ask a lot, do the animals in the touch tank, can they hurt you? Can they bite you? Will they hurt you? And no, we do have animals in here that could hurt you if you were another little sea creature. But we don't put anything in the touch tank that's going to hurt people because we want to sort of encourage people to see how these animals feel. And so the spot prawn are pretty skittish. These live to be about 5 years old or so. If you ever get like Alaska jumbo shrimp or anything like that at a restaurant, this is sort of what you're talking about. You can see this one's kind of feeling me out a bit. Not too sure about me still. And the thing that's fun about these are actually sequential hermaphrodites as a species. So they start as male, and then at a point in their life, they will actually become female. So the older ones here are female, the younger ones are male, and they will have eggs as they're females. They'll carry those around for a while, and then the eggs will hatch out, and they'll actually be little planktonic larvae. So when these hatch out, they are very, very small. They'd be able to be seen with the naked eye, but you wouldn't make out a lot of detail on them. And they would sort of float around, drift around in the water until they got big enough to settle out on the sea floor. And then in the back, I'm not sure if you can see it on Laura's camera there, but we've got some tentacles hanging out back here. These are our sea anemones. We'll get a better look at one a little later on. But these sea anemones, of course, people know them from maybe Finding Nemo. They sting. And indeed, when we touch them, they do try to sting us. Let's see if I can get this one to sort of stick to me a little bit. It did a moment ago, but today it's not feeling too sticky. So if they stick to you when you touch them, that's actually them trying to sting you. So I think we're going to move on over maybe to the next tank. This tank is primarily all those prawns as well as the sea anemones. And in fact, Rebecca, if you can kick over to the little handheld, the GoPro we've got here, we can show a top down of one of these anemones. There we go. It's a little jittery, but if I kind of come in there, you can see it's just sticking to me a little bit. It doesn't stick a lot. It's not really gripping me, but those little tentacles do kind of hang on to my fingers a bit. Oh, and it looks like Laura has found a real nice little shot in our next tank, so we'll move back on over to their camera. Oh, this is one of the coolest looking critters, very colorful. So we actually have a rose sea star here. And the rose sea star is related to all of your other echinoderms, which are spiny skinned animals like sea stars, or as some people know them, starfish. They, of course, aren't fish, so we get a little pedantic with it. We say they are sea stars. But we do encourage people to touch these. We always want to be gentle when we touch things in the touch tank, because you can see this is a little squishy. It's got a little give to it. But at the same time, all those little bumps on it, I don't know, they're not sharp, but there's an interesting texture to it. And we have a couple different sea stars in this tank, and then we also have a whole tank at the end that we'll get to with the sea stars. Let's see what Laura's got here as far as a view. Oh, we have the lyre crab. I've actually got a light, so we can light this up a little better perhaps for y'all. The lyre crab, very flat little crab here, and it's not lyre like it's telling us mistruths. It is lyre like the instrument, the harp-like instrument. And people worry a lot about the crab. They're like, oh, is that safe to touch? Yes. In fact, this one, a lot of times we get people telling us, oh, your crab's dead, because they'll touch it, and it just doesn't even respond. The lyre crab, just kind of with its flat body, it likes to hide underneath ledges or tuck under rocks, and it just sits there and tries to not react. But right next to it here, I'm not sure if you can see this hermit crab. Oh, there is a little baby hermit crab right there, I think Laura found. But we'll go on over to this bigger one here. So, of course, the hermit crab is fun because it doesn't build this shell that it lives in. Instead, it is using a shell that's left over from a snail. So a snail passed away, and we end up having these hermit crab cruising around looking for a nice big shell, and they will actually tuck in there. They've kind of got a little curled tail, sort of like you'd think like a lobster's tail. In fact, hermit crab are part of a group of crustaceans called squat lobsters, but they use that tail and they kind of wrap it around inside the shell, around that spiral in the middle. And you'll see we do have just lots of other shells. We don't like people picking them up, but we do have lots of empty shells in here. The big problem is you never quite know if they're empty, but we have to have different sizes because as the hermit crab grows, it will actually outgrow the shell, and it has to go find a new one. Right back here, we've actually got a much larger hermit crab kind of chilling at the back here. This is a wide-hand hermit crab. A lot of these crabs do have sort of a wider claw, one side being bigger than the other, and they'll use that for protection, not so much pinching. You know, these critters don't really like to pinch too much, but when they pull into their shell, they can use that wide claw almost as a door to sort of seal off the entrance to that shell. All right. I do love that little wide-hand hermit crab there. I think we're going to try to kick back on over into the GoPro here because we have another anemone here. So this is, the first one we looked at was actually a crimson anemone. I failed to say that, but this one here is called a painted anemone, or some folks call them Christmas anemones. That's because they've got a little green and like red on their sides. But you can see with me touching this one, it's really sticking.
Hey, Alex.
Yeah,
I have a question for you.
All right, we got a question.
Yeah, so Nathan from 3rd grade, Soldotna Montessori, how is it the anemones and such are unable to sting us?
Oh, that's a great question. So how are the anemones unable to sting us? Well, like I mentioned, when I touch them and they stick to us, they are trying. They are trying their darndest to sting us. But these ones are just a little too weak for our skin. If I fell face first into the tank and got one of these like on my eyeball, that would probably be able to sting me. Because it's very sensitive, right? But our fingers have pretty thick skin. And so these stinging cells that these anemones use, they can't get through our thick skin. Now, there are varieties out there that will irritate you. They can sting you. And of course, anemones look like jellyfish, or sea jellies, if we want to be pedantic, right? And there are some sea jellies that can't sting us as well. But the way that they're stinging is the exact same way between these. So in the case of the ones we've got in our touch tank, they are safe because they're just a little too weak for us. But out in the wild, I wouldn't just necessarily willy-nilly go touching species you don't recognize. The nice thing is that if you're sort of tide pooling in around Alaska or the Pacific Northwest, anemones like the crimson anemones or burrowing sea anemones or these painted anemones are pretty common. And so if you know what you're looking for, you can get out there and check them out. But if I was a little tiny fish, oh yeah, they would totally be able to sting. It's not like we've taken out the stingers of these animals or anything like that. Of course, the reason they have to sting is that's how they catch their food. Their mouth is actually right down in the middle. I'll try to clear away some tentacles here. I don't want to poke them in the mouth, but you might be able to see there's just a little area where it all kind of gathers together there. I'll see if I can show it on another anemone in a bit. But they have to sting their food because then they paralyze it and they drag it over into their mouth. If they don't paralyze their food, if they just grabbed like a little shrimp or a fish and they dragged it over and they stuffed it down in their stomach, and that shrimp or fish didn't want to be there, it would just crawl or swim right back out. So that's why they sting, is they're actually paralyzing their food so that they can digest it. All right, Laura has moved on to the next tank with their camera, so we'll cut on over to that. And I'm going to bring over my light, because this is a very cool one here. And again, that was a great question about the stinging. If anyone's got any questions, we'll take them by text, or you can, of course, leave them in the chat on this video. If you're not watching live, we're live every Wednesday at 11 Alaska time, so try to tune in. But if you're not watching live, you can leave a comment, and we will try to respond to those. And finally, if you just have a burning question, if you just wake up at like 3 in the morning going like, oh my gosh, how does a sea urchin eat? Well, no worries, we're going to talk about it. But you could email us at asktuffy@alaskasealife.org, and we will get to those as well. If you have any ideas for future episodes that you just really want to know how we do something at the center, that'll work as well. So as I mentioned here, we have a sea urchin. And this sea urchin, we've kind of got a little shot in the mouth of the sea urchin. So the sea urchins are those little spiny guys. And the mouth is just right down in the middle of the bottom. So they kind of have to roll up over their food. We're actually going to move the camera, I think, over to a smaller little sea urchin here. Oh, there we go. We can actually see some of those teeth. So they do have teeth in their mouth. They actually have 5 little teeth. And the favorite food for our urchins here are algae and kelps and that sort of thing. So they will actually use those teeth to kind of grind away at the algae and kelp. Now, something you might see is they have the spines, and then they have these little flexible bits as well. And I'm actually going to touch this one we've got the camera on right now, because they can move those spines around. You can see, and if I touch down in between the spines, they'll actually kind of like close their spines on your finger. We say it's giving you a hug, but mostly it's checking out, oh, is that something that wants to eat me? Now you can see in between the spines there are some little flexible bits as well, and those are actually tube feet. So I mentioned before the word echinoderm, or spiny skin, and echinoderms are sea urchins, sea cucumbers, which we haven't looked at yet, and sea stars are also echinoderms. And we have a video of the tube feet on a sea star. This one was right up at the surface, and it was kind of cruising along, feeling around for things. And you can see all those waving little tube feet. Those allow them to grip, and it's also how they move. They can form a little suction with each tube foot, and they can use that to even pull open clams or mussels. They are very strong that way. Oh, and the last echinoderm of those three we listed, Laura's actually got our sea cucumber here, and we caught this one eating too, which is real fun. So this sea cucumber's got its mouth kind of out, and it's very slow. We're actually going to show you sort of a sped up thing of a sea cucumber using its mouth here, because things in the touch tank move at a very slow pace. But you can see this mouth sort of comes out from the sea cucumber, and it's got like little tiny hands. This actually goes back and forth a couple times, and you can see how they move. They have their own tube feet on the bottom there. But these are sort of the Roombas of the sea. They scoot around, they suck up all the dirt off the bottom, they digest anything they can, decaying matter, leftover waste from other animals, and then what they pass is actually a pretty clean sediment. So they're helpful for us to have in these tanks, but they also play an enormously important role in the environment, just as little cleanup crews. And they can be found down as deep as even to the very bottom of the ocean. So Laura managed to find something else on our sea cucumber here. This is a worm, which some people get really grossed out by. But this is a little worm that's living underneath the sea cucumber. So we are up against the acrylic here, up against what you might think of as like the glass of the tank. And this worm is kind of just living under the sea cucumber. Now, it's not hurting the sea cucumber. There, of course, are many parasites, right? And those could be worms that would hurt the animals they live with. But this one just kind of uses the sea cucumber to hide. It's tucked away underneath, and it's not able to be eaten as easily, and it could probably sneak up towards the mouth and steal a bite or two. We actually get these underneath our sea stars as well, and they definitely go and snag a bite or two of food to eat. Now at the very back here, I'm not sure, Laura, if we can get a clear shot. Oh, excellent. So these are snail eggs, and we actually have a great shot right here, but we've got a really nice clear picture that we'll pull up there. These have been, these snails have been working on these a couple weeks now. And it sort of looks like a strange corn on the cob with all these little kernels. Each kernel can have thousands of eggs in it. So when these hatch out, there's just going to be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of little larvae snails drifting around in the water. And they will drift for even over 4 years as a larvae. But if they wind up somewhere that's really good to be a snail, like an awesome snail place, then they can metamorphosize into like an adult snail, or what we would recognize as a snail instead of a larvae. But if they just get carried away to somewhere that wouldn't be great to be a snail, if they got carried into the open ocean, they can delay becoming an adult snail. And they can do that for over 4 years. We don't know. There was a study of this species, the hairy triton snail. There was a study of them, and they kept them just circulating in water, and they lasted for over 4 years as a larvae. And then I think they just kind of ended the study because they just weren't turning into snails. So we don't know for sure how long they can do it, but 4 years would be long enough that if they got in a current, they could drift across the entire Pacific Ocean. So that is pretty cool that they can just delay that. Now, I mentioned they're a hairy triton. The reason for that, I'm not sure you can see it too well on this shell, but there's a little, there's a little bit of fuzz on the shell. It probably doesn't show up too well on our camera, unfortunately. But that fuzz can get worn off. Uh-oh, we're getting caught up by our sea urchins here. There's a little like fuzzy layer on the shell, kind of like hair, and that can actually get worn off. So some of our older ones, they just don't have as much, which I guess is equivalent to humans. They don't have as much hair sometimes when they get a little older. But these snails are called hairy tritons. They're actually the state seashell of Oregon, if you're out there keeping tabs of that. All right, now I mentioned things move very slow. So this tank that we just looked at, we have a fly-through of this tank where we actually sort of sped up time, right? It's a time lapse here. And you can see things do move. The urchins are all moving their spines. The sea cucumbers are just cruising along. Those sea anemones that we saw earlier, they're there as well. But people ask, do these animals like to be touched? Do they like to be, is it like petting them? Are they scared of us? Certainly, if we touch them, they're like, oh, is that something that could eat me? But we have a fly-through with hands going in there to touch the touch tank as well. And you can see within their life, it's actually really quick, this little hand coming down. And these animals, many of them are intertidal animals, which means they're constantly getting knocked around by waves. Other animals are crawling on top of them. So for a little hand to come down, as long as we're gentle with them, it's not too bad. Now we're going to cut back over to my handheld camera here real quick before we go back to Laura's camera. And this is just, well, let's see if I can make that light not as reflective in the camera there. Give me 1 second. Whoop, wrong way there, Alex. There we go. So you can see the mouth a little bit down in the middle of that sea anemone there. As I mentioned before, I wanted to show you the mouth a little better. And that is the only entrance in or out of the stomach of the sea anemone. So they will stuff food on down there. And if there's something they can't digest, like shells or bone, they will then actually like flip their stomach inside out of their mouth and sort of dump that stuff back out. All right, we're going to cut over to Laura's camera because they have moved to our last tank here. And we are looking, oh my gosh, why are you in here? I don't know why you're in here. So this is the underside of not a sea star, which is what I expected because this is the sea star tank. This is the underside of an animal called a chiton, C-H-I-T-O-N. And a chiton is a type of mollusk, so it's related to clams or slugs, snails, that sort of thing. And so if you think of this slug, right, you got a slug, doesn't have a shell. Then you think of a snail, kind of like a slug with a spiral shell. A chiton is sort of a slug with like overlapping armor plates down its back. So this is the bottom side of it. You can actually see it pressed up against the glass there with its foot. And then we've got its mouth over on that side. It's not doing a lot right now. It's kind of just resting. But its mouth is filled with a tongue that's very rough, kind of like a cat's tongue. And they will actually use that tongue to scrape algae off its surfaces. And so they'll cruise around and do that. But they are pretty well protected by those armor plates. And now, of course, we've got the sea stars right next door. Oh, and as I mentioned, there are worms living under our sea stars as well. And so that is one right there, just tucked right up next to the mouth. They'll kind of get right like in the oral groove there. There's a little spot where they can tuck in and not be interrupted. Now, the sea star won't like eat that worm by sucking it in like spaghetti or something, because sea stars actually push their stomachs out to eat. So when it started to push its stomach out, that worm would want to get out of there. But the way that sea stars eat is they sort of cruise on top of their food, and then they actually spit their stomach up onto the food, digest it, and then they suck their stomach back in. Laura found something else here. What do we got? Oh, lots of tube feet, and these ones are moving. So this is a sunflower sea star, which is probably the fastest species of sea star that we have here at the Sea Life Center. These can get a couple feet across. This one's pretty small. I'll just put my finger in there, the good old scale finger. So this one's not too long, but it is really booking it. As far as sea stars are concerned, you can see those tube feet all kind of moving along.
Alex, we have another question.
Yeah, Rebecca, what do we got?
How do they only expel the stuff they cannot digest?
Oh, talking about the anemones. How do the anemones only expel things that they can't digest? Well, so they take a long time to digest things. So basically, they just wait. And at some point, they're going to be like, gosh, I'm hungry again. I've got stuff in my stomach, though. I must have, I'm done with this. I need to catch new stuff. And then they'll sort of expel that out. So it takes them a long time. And that's the thing, is we don't actually feed these animals in the touch tank necessarily every single day, because many of them are scavengers. Many of them might only get one good meal like a week out in the wild. Here they're going to get fed a couple times a week, but they're all very slow at actually digesting their food. Any other questions while we're there? All right. So I wanted to show another sort of bird's eye view of one of our tanks here at the Sea Life Center. And this is another time lapse, but you can see throughout the day, they just cruise around in their tanks. And when they're doing that, they might be looking for food. They might be, trying to get away from their neighbors. These sunflower sea stars will actually eat other sea stars. They're pretty aggressive, but we just make sure that they're not quite big enough to do that here. We keep an eye on them. Laura has found sort of a clear shot of a mouth of a sea star here. And so you can see, again, it's just a hole like the urchin had, but unlike the urchin, they do not have teeth in that mouth. So they actually do just have to push that stomach out. And that makes it really helpful for eating things like clams or mussel, because they can use their tube feet to pry those open, but they only have to pry them open just a little tiny bit, and then they will push their stomach out through their mouth down into the shell. So they only have to open it up, like teeny tiny little amount. They'll push their stomach down into the shell, digest the living creature from inside the shell, and then when they suck their stomach back up and they crawl away, they are actually leaving behind just an empty shell at that point. Now, like I said, they're going after things like clams, mussels. They're very slow, so they're having to go after slow food. But I also mentioned most of the animals here are scavengers. So if they found something dead, they would eat that dead animal, and that is A-okay, playing a very important role cleaning up our environment. All right. Well, I think we'll cut back on over to our main camera here. I don't see any more questions on my end. But if you've got any, of course, you can text. You can leave them in the chat. I actually can't pull the chat up now, it looks like, for whatever reason. I'll try to get that sorted. But if you have any questions later, if you, like I said, wake up in the middle of the night going, oh my gosh, they didn't talk about this, you are free to leave a comment on these videos, or you can email us at asktuffy@alaskasealife.org. We are going to be doing these virtual visits live from the Alaska Sea Life Center every Wednesday through the winter at 11 o'clock Alaska time. So hopefully that's not too late or too early for you if you're not in Alaska. But if it is, you can join us afterwards. These recordings will stay up. But we want to thank our sponsors for these videos. Again, the Royal Caribbean Group and the Alaska Travel Industry Association Foundation have made it so that these programs can be free to you through this year, and that's really fun. We're pretty excited to be able to bring you the Alaska Sea Life Center through these live virtual visits. And with that, I'm going to bid you farewell, and we're actually going to kick it back over to our first little intro video there and give you a glimpse of the touch tanks at night, just going through those real nice and slow.